Boy, Mystery of the Blues. This one's gonna be a slugfest. This is an episode of the Chronicles of Young Indiana Jones. Came out in 1993, and this was around a time when people were kind of like wondering if they were gonna make a fourth Indiana Jones movie. The TV show, The Chronicles of Young Indiana Jones, it was now officially on its third season, and this is kind of like a sweeps week episode because they pull out all the stops. They've got Harrison Ford in as Indiana Jones in this episode at the beginning and at the end. And when you see Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones at the beginning of this, you feel like, oh man, this is Indiana Jones. This is awesome. Like, this is going to be so cool. But then the episode picks up and it's Indiana Jones in the 20s, right? It's young Indiana Jones in the 20s. And, it's right after World War One. It's rough. I don't know another way to put it. It's really rough to kind of get through. He meets these famous blues artists and jazz artists throughout the episode, and he has a conversation about race in the episode. And uh, it's uh, it's kind of hard because not because it's hard because it's talking about race, but because it's hard because it doesn't feel like Indiana Jones. It just doesn't feel like you're watching a swashbuckling, fun adventure episode of TV. Like there's a scene in the movie where Indiana Jones is playing his jazz, one of his jazz saxophones, right? He's playing an instrument on the beach. He's walking along. And he's not paying attention where he's going, and this dude stops him and says, "Just so you know, you're entering the other side of the beach, like the blacks only side of the beach," and and Indiana Jones at this point, three seasons in, three seasons in, he's been in the Mexican Revolution. He's been in World War One. He's been all over the world. He's globetrotted. He's done a whole lot of stuff, but he gets told he's entering into another part of the beach, and he looks around, and he turns around and goes the other way, and he almost looks shocked. He looks surprised, and it was just kind of like I feel like Indiana Jones really wouldn't have done that. I feel like he would have been like, okay, and would have just kind of kept going. Would have kept playing his little instrument and would have been fine. Like he wouldn't have cared. It just Sean Patrick Flannery is the guy who plays young Indiana Jones, and he does good. He does good, but every time I see him, I'm like, oh hey, that's the guy from Boondock Saints. It's every time I see him. I can't help it. I don't know if you guys watched the show when you were younger and you were able to kind of get over it. I was not able to get over it. I could not see one of the brothers from Boondock Saints when I watched Sean Patrick Flannery, or Norman Reedus actually at all. I just always see the Boondock Saints, but whatever. So this episode also talks about what it was like and this I actually thought was interesting. This I actually did like. Indiana Jones is sitting down to a Sunday brunch or Sunday lunch. It's right after church. He went to a Pentecostal church, so they're he's at this black family's home, and they're sitting down talking, and he finds out that one of the brothers of his friend is was a war vet, right? Was in World War One with Indiana Jones, and they're talking and they're sharing this bond about what it was like over there as opposed to coming home, and it was really interesting, and I really liked the conversation, and then uh, it's it's kind of a really good look at what it must have been like for a soldier, a black soldier from World War One, to come home and still be segregated and discarded in society at that time. Like it was one of those things that it was like, wow, this is actually good to talk about, what it must have been like the history of the United States to go through this and then to get to where um, society was better. You know what I'm saying? Where like we made so much progress, and it was a really good sort of table scene. And you see all these different views because it ends up erupting into a huge family argument. Indiana Jones just kind of sitting there eating his soup, just listening to everybody argue. He's like, I just thought we were talking about what it was like over there, and then coming home, for Indiana Jones, he talks about, he's over there, he does what he does, comes home, and then he goes back to school, and then he finds all these other kids that didn't serve, and he doesn't have anything really in common with a lot of them. And then the movie stops sort of. This should have been like a two-parter, it feels like, because you have this whole part with the actual blues and jazz aspect, the mystery of the blues, right? And that just kind of ends. Like that just ends. And then you go into this Indiana Jones working at a restaurant and his boss is involved with the mob. It I had to rewind the episode a couple times to make sure I didn't miss something because it honestly it felt forced. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it was just it was like okay, so what? I thought we were talking about I thought we were talking about blues, man. Well, we were talking about blues, but now we're going to be talking about the mob. And there just wasn't a lot of focus. There wasn't a lot of focus, and the whole time that you're watching the bulk of this episode, you're wanting to see more Harrison Ford. That's all it is. And then you find out that Indy's roommate in college is Elliot Ness. Yep, that Elliot Ness, the guy who brought down Al Capone. Also, Al Capone is in this, and it's wild. It's like, hang on a second, what? This doesn't make a lick of sense. What am I watching right now? I was so happy when the episode was over. I was just like, never again. I don't know why I thought I could watch this and be fine. And I'll tell you why I thought I could watch it. It's because I stumbled across it on YouTube before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, and I watched it then. But I think I fell asleep because I remembered Harrison Ford a lot better, or being in this a lot more than what he is. I must have fallen asleep through the bulk of this episode when I was younger and I watched it the first time. And honestly, the parts with Harrison Ford, the beginning and the end, are the best parts of this episode. Everything else is trash. Everything else does not flow. Nothing goes good together. It feels like everything's kind of just put together with Mod Podge and duct tape. It just it's not fun. And they seem to have to like want to, put a good message out about, you know, history and racial segregation throughout history, as well as music and how music impacts you emotionally, and the mob uh, it doesn't quite take off. Nothing quite takes off in this episode. And when you get to the end, the beginning is Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones with this Indian dude, and they're getting this flute back that means a lot to this Indian dude's people. And then at the end, you get this guy who resembles the villain, the guy who burns his hand. You get a guy that resembles that coming through the door, and he's kind of like a made-for-TV movie version of the villain from Raiders. And seeing Harrison Ford's caliber on TV with TV caliber actors, I don't know. It's just like it'd be like watching like I don't know Leonardo DiCaprio in an episode of Law and Order. Like, sure, Law and Order can be really good television, but when you have someone on the acting skill of Leonardo DiCaprio coming down to that level of TV, it looks funny. It looks weird. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just kind of weird. And Harrison Ford, he sells it. And what's funny is there's this like he's fighting the bad guys in the cabin that they're in, that him and this Indian dude are in there, and then he's fighting the bad guys, and then he takes away one of their guns. And he turns it around, he pulls the trigger, and nothing happens. The bad guy then says, "Oh yeah, I don't like loaded weapons." So this came on a Sunday night in 1993 at like 8 o'clock. It just feels like such a TV thing. Like, oh, a bad guy wouldn't carry bullets in his gun? Shut up. Shut up, television show. No one believes you. It just, it was such a weird thing. The best part about it was honestly Harrison Ford at the beginning and at the end. This is a set actually before some of the events of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but it's set in the 50s, the same time period that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is in. So I think this is actually set about 4 or 5 years before Crystal Skull. Harrison Ford noticeably looks older in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull than he does in this episode. Because from let's see, 93 to 2008, what? That's a good time period. Like that's a good jump of time. And they just kind of I don't know. Like it felt weird for me. It felt weird. I'll say that for me, it felt kind of weird to see Indiana Jones here, still kind of young and on top of his game. And then you go to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull where he's older, retired age. Oh, he also has a beard in this episode, And the whole reason Harrison Ford has a beard as Indiana Jones in this episode is because he was actually filming The Fugitive, which is a beautiful movie. I love The Fugitive, one of my favorite movies. And the sequel to it, U.S. Marshals, also not bad. A lot of fun. Anyway, guys, this episode of television was hard to get through. I do not recommend anybody watch it unless you are just watching the beginning and the end. Then please go from the beginning and then cut to the end. There's no reason to watch the whole episode because it's kind of garbage and it did not age well. And I'm going to give it 1.5 out of 5 stars. And I'll catch you guys in the next one when we talk about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You guys have a great day.